Last summer, I ventured into the Catskill Mountains of New York in search of a rainforest where I thought there might be one, only to learn that although rainforest conditions do exist here, the rocky soil doesn't hold onto this water well enough to support such lush vegetation. The reason the soils here in New York hold so little water is because 15,000 years ago, this whole region had its topsoil scraped clean off by glaciers, and now all that remains is a thin covering of rocks. While this was a little disappointing to discover, it only made me more determined than ever to find a rainforest in an unexpected place. And now that we have a better understanding of this area's natural history, I want to take another look at a precipitation map of the United States. As we just learned, rainforests cannot exist anywhere glaciers extended during the last ice age, so if we trace a line across the last glacial maximum, that should give us our theoretical limit to how far north temperate rainforest can climb here on the East Coast. Everywhere above this line likely doesn't have sufficient soil to support a rainforest, including the Catskills and Adirondack Mountains here in New York, as well as the Green Mountains of Vermont and the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Below this line, however, are lands left unscathed by glaciers, meaning these areas host far deeper soils, making rainforests at the very least possible in these areas. But as we can see, only the very peaks of the Appalachian Mountains seem to actually receive enough rainfall to qualify as such, resulting in this area being the only widely recognized temperate rainforest here on the East Coast. This is what you'd call a rainforest in an expected place. However, if we take an even closer look at this map, we'll find a few more spots scattered throughout this range where rainfall again just barely exceeds this threshold, forming several more pockets of potential rainforest. The most significant of these can be found in West Virginia, where the Allegheny Mountains reach their apex and in doing so cause more than 60 inches of precipitation to fall annually, well above the 55-inch criteria established by Alabac, meaning based on our current understanding of forest ecology and natural history, there could be a rainforest in West Virginia. And I say could be because, well, when I first started researching this, I couldn't actually find any sources to back up this claim. But then something funny happened. Last October, I released my Unexpected Rainforest in New York video, where near the end I gave practically the same explanation I just gave you all, and 9 days later the Wikipedia page for Appalachian temperate rainforest was updated. The change made was to add West Virginia to the areas with rainforest in Appalachia. Pretty soon, the page went from looking like this to this, featuring a lot more text, a lot more pictures, and even a new map to help illustrate the exact areas in Appalachia that meet the climatic criteria of a temperate rainforest. Here we can see the peaks of the Appalachians have once again been highlighted, but wouldn't you know it, now we also have this part of West Virginia included as a separate island. So that's it then? If even Wikipedia already says there is a rainforest here, then surely there must be. Case closed, right? Well, while I'm certainly happy to claim responsibility for this change, there's just one problem. I've never actually been to West Virginia, and I don't know for sure if there's a rainforest there or not. I mean, so far, this hypothesis is based entirely on intangible maps, but we learned from the last video how unforeseen environmental conditions can prevent rainforests from growing in even the rainiest of places, so I don't feel comfortable saying with certainty what the forest there is like, even if Wikipedia does. That's why I still feel the need to put this idea to the test, and the only way to do that is by venturing out into the West Virginian wilderness myself to see if I can find a rainforest in an unexpected place. Okay, I know you all just want me to go to West Virginia straight away and get this over with, but I believe in being scientific, and typically when performing an experiment, you first set up a control. The way I see it, the only chance I have of being able to determine whether or not there's a temperate rainforest in West Virginia is by having something else to compare it to. So before I even set foot in West Virginia, I think I first need to visit the mountains further south, the very tallest and rainiest portion of the Appalachians, to learn what makes the forest here so special to begin with. Fortunately, there are several parks in the area to choose from: Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee, Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest in Georgia, Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina, and at the center of them all, Great Smoky National Park. However, according to pretty much every map I've looked at, the area that truly sustains the highest annual precipitation in the entire region is found right here in the southwestern corner of North Carolina, within the Nantahala National Forest. On paper, this appears to be the rainiest place on this side of the continent, and exactly where I should go to learn what a true Appalachian temperate rainforest looks like. So before I head to West Virginia, I'm first flying to Asheville, North Carolina. While I'm in the air, let me explain what I'll be looking for once I'm there. You see, typical forests, like those that grow around where I live in New York, consist of a mix of trees that form a single canopy up high, and herbaceous plants like ferns that line the forest floor. This is the climax forest structure in even the richest forests here in New York, including at the very top of Slide Mountain, the tallest and rainiest peak in the Catskills. With even more water, however, forests can support an even greater abundance of vegetation in the form of an understory. And this is what I believe distinguishes a rainforest from a regular forest, as the understory creates all sorts of new nooks and crannies for animals to inhabit, as well as provides additional resources like food and flowers, leading to a more productive environment overall. So that's what I'll be looking to see when I touch down in just a moment. Specifically, here in North America, there are two main plants that dominate the understory: rhododendrons and mountain laurel. Rhododendrons are easy to identify by their massive tear-shaped leaf clusters and their large pink flowers, whereas mountain laurel has smaller leaves but produce loads of tiny white and pink flowers that make them easy to spot as well. If I can find either of these in great abundance, I'll be confident I'm standing in a rainforest. However, that's not all I'll be looking for. While the vegetation present may be the most crucial aspect of a rainforest, I also believe that part of what makes rainforests so special is that the added plant life results in a greater abundance of animal life as well. So I want to come up with an animal I can look for to help us gauge this. If you've been with this channel long enough, you might have noticed I enjoy looking for salamanders, and there's a good reason behind this. In the 1970s, this paper titled "Salamander Population and Biomass in the Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest in New Hampshire" found nearly 3,000 salamanders on a single hectare. With this number, researchers were able to calculate the biomass of salamanders is about twice that of birds during the birds' peak breeding season, and is about equal to the biomass of small mammals. You might also remember how in a recent video we looked at this map of worldwide salamander distribution, where we can see the Appalachian region happens to be home to a greater variety of salamanders than anywhere else on the planet. Together, that makes salamanders both some of the most abundant and most diverse members of these forests, so I'll be keeping an eye out for any as well. Looking for something specific to compare my own findings against, further down we'll read how there are 5 species of salamander in the Hubbard Brook Forest: the red-backed salamander, the dusky salamander, the two-lined salamander, the spring salamander, and the red-spotted newt. So this is the baseline I'll compare my findings to. And would you look at that, my plane just landed in Asheville, North Carolina. From here, it was an hour drive to get to Nantahala, and to be honest, this was really all it took to convince me I'd stepped foot into a rainforest. Well, except for the fact that I hadn't set foot in a rainforest, not yet anyway, so once I felt confidently within the Nantahala forest, I visited some local hiking trails, and as I expected, what I found at each of them was essentially the same: a lush forest absolutely brimming with life. While most of the trails were lined with rhododendrons, sadly I'd come too late in the season to catch them flowering. Nevertheless, they stood as a formidable wall of vegetation against the path. Though after getting closer to water, I was delighted to find I had arrived just in time to see the mountain laurel in bloom. These filled the banks of this forest with countless little pinkish white flowers that made this place feel especially rich, and I hope illustrate to you all exactly how an understory provides additional resources for the environment. And by the end of my first day exploring the area, I was starting to understand how the added rainfall was affecting the local ecology.
Alright, I don't know if you can hear it, but it's pouring rain right now. So I decided to stop, take some shelter under the rhododendrons. Whew. Based on the criteria established a few minutes ago, I think it's safe to say this here is a temperate rainforest, as it clearly has a thick understory of rhododendrons. I guess all that's left to do now is find some salamanders.
On my second day here, I climbed Whiteside Mountain, which gave me a view of this forest from above, and what I saw only helped confirm my thoughts. Up here, you could literally witness the orographic effect taking place, as moist air was being blown up this mountainside, where it condensed into clouds right before your eyes before passing overhead. This was honestly so cool to see that I ended up spending a lot of the day just watching the clouds roll over the countryside. And it wasn't long before I truly started to understand why this is the rainiest place on the East Coast. Okay, so I'll admit I didn't find quite as many salamanders as I expected. On the first day, I started out filming each and every rock I looked under, which left me with a lot of really uninteresting footage. But sure enough, after enough time, I did succeed in uncovering what was probably a dusky salamander, though it wasn't until my second day hiking up Whiteside Mountain that I started to have any real luck. First, without even lifting a stone, I spotted a red eft walking across the trail. These are one of the 5 found in the Hubbard Brook Forest, so to be honest, this wasn't all that exciting, as I also find these in New York all the time, and I'd say they're probably the most common salamander you'll see in the forests of eastern North America. Not necessarily because they're the most numerous, but rather they're the only ones brave enough to walk around the forest floor in broad daylight, and their bright orange colors meant to ward off predators makes them even easier to spot, so you end up seeing them whether you're looking for them or not. Soon after, I started finding other common salamanders, like seal salamanders, ravine salamanders, some eastern red-backed salamanders, and plenty more duskies. The only one I really had trouble identifying was this one, which I wasn't able to get any closer to, though using this footage I naturalist identified it as a red-cheeked salamander, which looks like it could be right, but I wasn't able to get a clear enough view of its cheeks to confirm it. However, by far the most exciting find of the trip happened on my way back down the mountain when I noticed this small ditch running beside the trail. Water dripping off the cliff face supplied a small creek running through this ravine, and it was within these shallow waters that I uncovered the largest and most brightly colored salamander I'd seen this entire trip. Although I was certain this was a species I hadn't seen before, the dirt covering him made it hard to be sure which one exactly before I let him crawl away. Soon after, in the very same trailside ditch, I found another of the same kind of salamander, except this one wasn't completely covered in mud, allowing us to fully appreciate it. iNaturalist keeps identifying this as a red salamander, but after getting such an up-close look, I think they look more like spring salamanders. Either way, they were definitely the most impressive display of salamander diversity I found here in Appalachia. However, there was one last surprise in store for me on my third and final day exploring the Nantahala Forest. At the very end of the very last trail I was going to hike that day, I came across a small pond, and swimming within its waters were loads and loads of eastern newts. If you'll recall, I already spotted the adolescent stage of these guys earlier, the red eft, but now we're getting to see them as full-grown adults. Although newts are still technically salamanders, what makes them distinct is their life cycle, as they spend their early days as forest dwellers before re-entering the water to live out the final stage of their lives, whereas most other salamanders are the opposite, spending their juvenile phase in an aquatic environment before moving onto land in their adulthood. Anyway, there were so many of these guys in this one pond that by numbers alone, the eastern newt was easily the most numerous salamander I saw in Nantahala. In total, I found about 7 of the 72 or so species of salamander known to live here, including 4 out of the 5 common species, which I'd say is pretty good considering I only searched one small area in the Nantahala forest. But by now, I'd say that I know what true Appalachian rainforest looks like, so it's time to fly back home to New York and then drive 8 hours to West Virginia. While I'm driving, let me take this time to explain where exactly in West Virginia I'll be heading. If we look at an even higher resolution precipitation map of the state, we'll find several small summits where rainfall exceeds our 55-inch threshold. Although many of these fall within the Monongahela National Forest, the absolute rainiest area in the state actually falls outside of this park, between the aptly named Rich Mountain and Turkey Bone Mountain. The only public park in this vicinity is the much smaller Cumberbatch State Forest. And it's the forest here within this lesser known park that I believe has the greatest potential to support a temperate rainforest, so that's where I'm headed now. Arriving in Cumberbatch, it was pretty hard to tell from the road what the makeup of the forest was, and I started to worry I might have been wrong about all this. But once I got out onto the hiking trails, I was greeted with a familiar sight, rhododendrons as far as the eye could see, which wasn't very far at all as they often formed impenetrable green walls against the pathways, preventing me from peering any deeper than a few feet into the forest. I thought seeing this from above might help illustrate how dense the understory was even better, so I tried flying my drone only to crash it almost immediately, which was unfortunate but just goes to show how crowded the forest was. I even managed to find a few rhododendrons still flowering, and each time they were buzzing with activity. Though after filming myself walking past the same plant over and over again, I started to feel like I had proved my point. Clearly, I'd found another forest featuring a rich rhododendron understory, and so I soon turned my attention to the many riverbeds here in search of salamanders. The first and most common find of the day were what I believe are seal salamanders, or at least that's again what iNaturalist identified them as. Like I said, I found loads of these, and I was starting to worry they'd be the only species I'd find until I finally uncovered this guy. Using the 2 black lines that run all the way along its back, I was able to identify this as a 2-lined salamander, and judging on where I was, my guess would be Uracea bislineata, or the northern 2-lined salamander. Although these are fairly common, they're the only species from the Hubbard Brook Forest that I didn't see in Nantahala, so to me this was another exciting find, and motivated me to continue looking. Soon I also started finding lots of dusky salamanders, what iNaturalist tells me were Allegheny Mountain dusky salamanders, though if you ask me, I can't help but feel like some could have been northern dusky salamanders as well, as they're practically identical and are also very common throughout the area. Then I found some more eastern red-backed salamanders, as well as these dark reddish-black ones that had lots of light, almost bluish dots on their sides, which I think are northern ravine salamanders. Once I felt satisfied with the number of species I'd found directly beside the river, I decided to move deeper into the forest to see if I could find a different assortment of salamanders. Sure enough, it wasn't long before I came across some more red efts, which again I didn't so much find as I nearly stepped on as they crawled across the walking path. Taking this as a good sign, I moved further into the woods, where I soon added another species to my list. This one was much more orange than the rest, and iNaturalist identified it as Uracea longicauda, or the long-tailed salamander. This was really exciting because I'd actually already learned about these while making my biogeography of caves video, as long-tailed salamanders are often considered cave salamanders that only occasionally venture outside, so the fact that I found one on the rainforest floor is pretty lucky and suggests there's some sort of cave system beneath this forest as well. But my luck didn't stop there, as soon afterwards I lifted up a rotting log to uncover this amazing specimen. Its dark skin with big white spots made it easy to identify as a slimy salamander, and again, based on where I was, probably Plethodon glutinosus, or the northern slimy salamander, though I could only get a quick look at him before he darted off back beneath the leaf litter. Not long after this, I turned over another rock to find a small pool of water, and in it sat a very large, pale but slightly orange salamander. iNaturalist confidently identified this as a spring salamander, the very same species I believe I found back on Whiteside Mountain, but you might notice these two salamanders don't closely resemble one another, so what's going on here? Well, if you look closely, you can make out a pair of gills on this fella, telling us this salamander is still in its larval stage. That explains why I found it in a flooded pocket beneath a rock, as at this point in their development they can only breathe while submerged in water. We can even see these pretty white spots all over its face that help us confirm it as an adolescent. It's only in full maturity that their colors become really prominent, which must have been what I found back in North Carolina. Though unfortunately it was at this point that the battery on my DSLR camera died, which is what I was using to get all my macro shots. So of course that's when I found the biggest salamander I'd seen this entire trip. The only camera I had left was my GoPro, which doesn't do well focusing on objects really close to it, so this was the best footage I could get before he darted away. By the looks of it, this was an adult spring salamander, though it's still not quite as orange as the ones I found in Nantahala. After this, the only other species I thought I might have seen came when I found this very, very small salamander, what must have been a newborn, and judging on the line of yellow spots running down its back, all I could think of was the yellow spotted salamander, though considering how young this guy is, it's hard to say for sure. In fact, there were lots of salamanders I just couldn't quite identify, even with the help of iNaturalist. Although I expect most are just different variations on those I've already mentioned, I can't say I know for sure, so maybe some true herpetologist could help me out with these in the comments. In total, I'm confident in saying I found at least 9, maybe 10 species of salamander, which is more than I found in Nantahala, including all 5 common ones from the Hubbard Brook experiment. What I hope this illustrates is just how much both the flora and fauna of the Cumberbatch State Forest greatly resembles those found further south, both in its richness and variety. Rhododendrons have clearly created a substantial understory that's become home to a healthy bunch of salamanders. So yeah, I'll say it, if you ask me, this qualifies as a rainforest in an unexpected place. I know Wikipedia sort of beat me to the punch on this one, but to tell the truth, it wasn't until I set foot in this forest myself that I really started to believe it could be true. Though now that I have explored this area and confirmed for us that rainforest can exist this far north, I want to continue pushing this search even further north, because if you ask me, even now the Wikipedia page for Appalachian rainforest remains incomplete. After all, no part of West Virginia fell under glaciers during the last ice age, but rather the furthest glaciers ever reached was what's now Pennsylvania. And what do you know, there are a few small mountain ranges here, such as the Poconos, that receive just over 55 inches of precipitation annually. Based on everything we've learned so far about Appalachian temperate rainforest, these mountains have the potential to support the northernmost extension of rainforest on this side of the continent. Yet the Wikipedia page makes no mention of the Poconos, so there's no way for me to confirm this, except by going there myself and having a look around. That's my favorite part of making videos like this. I always learn something new by exploring these unique areas, something I can then reapply to my understanding to help me find even more amazing places. So if you enjoyed this video and want to see me visit the Poconos of Pennsylvania to get to the bottom of this once and for all, let me know by leaving a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll continue searching for rainforests in unexpected places.